Muhammad's Criminal Enterprise. This is episode 13. We're continuing to make our way through the 8th Surah as it commemorates one of the more hideous episodes in anyone's life. And if it hadn't been for the fact that the Quran is believed by some 2 billion Muslims to be the word of their God, to be the exemplar of the ideal life, to be the mandate for how they must live, then we would simply write this piece of trash off as we do Mein Kampf. The difference is the Quran is much more poorly written than Mein Kampf. Studied both, and I can tell you that Hitler was a vastly more intelligent and articulate writer than was Allah. It's not my opinion, it's a statement of absolute fact. I can tell you that the subject of the Quran is quite possibly the worst man who ever lived. Mohamad was a pedophile, he was a rapist, he was a mass murdering terrorist. He was a psychopath. He was sadistic. He was a misogynist. He was a renowned liar. And as a mass murderer who funded his life, his ambition with human trafficking and these slavery, you would just write it off and say, wow, there really were some hideous people in history, and this fellow Muhammad was clearly one of the most hideous of them. But unfortunately, these stories about, for example, the 8th Surah, about stealing is lawful and good, about Muhammad and Allah celebrating death, about them turning thievery into a religious rite. Unfortunately, these things are now perceived as unessential instructions and behaviors for 2 billion people. And they express themselves this way. Those who perpetrated 10/7 in Israel, they were good Muslims. They were doing exactly what Muhammad did and what Allah ordered. The shame of it is that so many apologize for Islam. So we're going to continue to go through the Quran to demonstrate what it has to say about this butchery that took place at Badr. Badr was Muhammad's first successful terrorist raid. In it, he attacked his former neighbors, extended family, and it was ghoulish. It was armed robbers, by their own admission, attacking overweight, balding businessmen who were doing nothing to bother anyone. And they kidnapped them, they abducted them, they sold them for ransom, they mutilated them, killed them, and then gloated over. And so when he got back to Yathrib, which is where the Mohammedan Muslims were living because they were laughed out of Babel in shame, following the satanic verses and the donk mule ride from the Kaaba to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And because of that, they arrived and they had no skill sets. Threatening to slaughter people and declaring war against all mankind, which preceded their arrival, really isn't industry. And so since they didn't have an economic plan and they didn't much care for work, all they had was terror, armed robbery. They were sand pirates. And they had initially lived in Jewish housing and survived on Jewish charity in Yathrib. But after a while, they became, well, a burden. And so the only way that they could progress, if you will, was to rob a civilian caravan. And the time they didn't dawn on them, maybe they should just rob the Jews, because, well, the Jews were providing them with housing and everything else. They didn't probably have enough weapons to do that at the time. Not that the Jews were armed in Yathrib, some 30,000 of them, but they outnumbered the Muslims by such a enormous amount that even without weapons, it would have been tough for the Muslims to pull it off at this point. So they needed some scores so that they could buy more weapons to be more formidable in their savagery before they started exiling and killing Jews. And so they, by their own admission, they targeted this caravan from their former family and extended family and neighbors. And it was a ruthless affair. So they get back to Yathrib, and there are those that didn't go on the mission, and they're saying, wait a minute, you went out and you robbed your own family, your fathers, your sons, your neighbors. You attacked them by surprise. You killed some, you abducted others. You're splitting up the booty, and now you're chanting as if this was a religious act and that your God participated and sponsored it. And you're pretending that Muhammad is a prophet speaking for God when he is celebrating armed robbery, mass murder, and just savage brutality. So Allah had to make it sound like in the Quran or Muhammad that, well, these businessmen who just were out on their own, bothering no one, had it coming. And he had a little problem with that because the people that they attacked, well, they were the custodians of the Kaaba. It was the Quraysh that had conceived this rock pile for rock gods as a money-making scheme. You know, there weren't a lot of ways to make money in what was really Petra, not Mecca at the time, because it had been ruined. The aqueduct had been destroyed by an earthquake, and the Romans had left. The Nabateans, who originally built the city as a religious Mecca, were long gone. And so it's kind of a hideaway for people of low repute that could just hide behind the sandstone walls of what was a crumbling relic. And because there was shelter here, and Petra was actually on the path between where the ships would have docked at the end of the Red Sea, going towards the Mediterranean and the rest of the known world, caravans would pass through there. And so they came up with this idea that you could bring your own rock to the rock pile. Didn't much care what the name of your rock was. Alat, Manat, Al-Uzza, Harat, Allah, Ar-Rahman, you name them. They could all be part of the pile, and you could come and you could pay them for the upkeep of your rock. They would keep the rocks properly watered and dusted and the like, and they would coordinate pilgrimages to the rock pile known as the Kaaba. You could circumambulate it, all sorts of Ramadan festivals associated with the rock pile to rock gods and goddesses. And they turned it into a decent scam. They had a tax for participating. They called it the same thing that it was called in Islam as the Hajj. They called the pilgrimage or the Hajj, the same as it continued to be in Islam. It was still during the same month of Ramadan, so they kept that part of the pagan lore, right back into to Islam. Prostration prayer was their invention, and was incorporated in Islam. So this idea that Muhammad created a religion or introduced a religion is just total nonsense. He simply stole the religion of his extended family and neighbors. Virtually everything about Islam was practiced by the pagans around the rock pile to rock gods of the Kaaba 2 centuries before Muhammad was born. And the rest of the Quran, when it has a religious veneer, it's all stories that Muhammad purchased from the rabbis at Yathrib as they recited their Talmud to him, and then he twisted those stories to suit his situation. That just happened to be the truth about Islam. If you don't like it, then sorry, but I speak as an expert on this subject. I've written 5 volumes, 4,200 pages, presenting all there is to know about Allah, Muhammad, the Quran, the Hadith, and the inception of the religion of Islam. The first to put the Quran in chronological order and present the entire book in the context of Muhammad's life so that it could be understood. And this is the message. So now that we are they are celebrating their carnage at Badr, Allah needs to demonize the very people that created the religion that Muhammad is allegedly promoting. And so what he's saying is that those people, well, they claim to be the custodians of the Kaaba and its guardians. No. They can't be because they don't fear Allah. Well, true, they didn't fear Allah because Allah really wasn't part of the garden of rock gods. He was a come lately, and the gods and goddesses all had other names. And so Allah was, as a rock god, a little upset with his lack of stature in the Kaaba. Didn't want the Quraysh to continue to control his rock pile. So he had to demean them and say, no, they can't be the guardians and custodians of the Kaaba because, well, they don't fear me sufficiently. And if you're working, if you're going to be part of my new religion, you need to fear me. Because if you don't fear me, we don't have a religion. That's really all I got to offer is I need you to be afraid of me, and they're not sufficiently afraid of me. In fact, they're mocking me because they claim I can't do anything, which happens to be true. But nonetheless, we need fear. So, Quran 8:34. But what for them that not punish them, Allahu, while they hinder from the mosque al-Haram, while not they are its guardians. Not its guardians except the ones who fear, but most of them do not know. Okay, so it sounds a little stilted. I'm presenting it as word for word and as accurately as can be from the most respected translators, using the most esteemed interlinears, giving you a literal rendering of the Quranic text. Okay, so the point is here that the Quraysh, the actual custodians of the Kaaba, the inventors of the religion of Islam, were really tired of Muhammad's claims. And it was the never-ending argument, the single most common theme throughout the Quran, where those who knew Muhammad best said that he was demon-possessed, that he was a miserable SOB, that he was plagiarizing everything, just made it up from prior people's lores. He didn't have an inventive bone in his body, and that he was your overall schemer. And so Muhammad didn't have an answer for that, nor did Allah. There was never any evidence ever provided that this just wasn't a complete and utter fraud. All that we have is fear, where Allah said, anyone who has questioned my messengers in the past, I have terrorized, I have destroyed, I have plundered. And so I will terrorize, I will destroy, I will plunder you. I will torture you. And that was the only retort, is that you mock my guy. It doesn't matter you're telling the truth about him, because I don't have a retort for any of the claims that you've made against him. It's just that I don't like you saying that, so I'm going to torture you. And he had threatened his day of doom, and the sky was going to fall, and the mountains were going to run away, and it was just going to be really, really bad. And the Koresh finally said, put up your shop. They're just tired of hearing you whine about this. And so what Allah is saying here is that no, that I can't, I'm not going to punish them now. I'm going to punish them later. You just wait and see. Well, now it's 1,400 years later, of course, and he hasn't done it. But nonetheless, he's on record saying, I'm going to do it. And even though they're all long gone at this point. And his reason is that they are hindering from the mosques of Al-Haram. The problem with that is that if there was a mosque of Al-Haram, I think we have Wookiee is in the way, but that's okay. The Wookiee needs a little airtime too, that if they're hindering from the Mosque Al-Haram, guess who created the Mosque Al-Haram? No, that would be the pagan Quraysh, not Muhammad. So mosque is a pagan term of the Quraysh religion around the pagan rock pile. That's not good if you're trying to pretend that you have started this new monotheistic religion around Allah when Allah is not even one of the rocks. So the mosque is a pagan term. Al-Haram is one of those really strange terms, of course, in Arabic. It is from a same word in Hebrew, as is most everything in the Quran. And it is the ultimate in duplicity. It can be, in fact, its primary meaning is harmful and forbidden. But that which is harmful and what would be forbidden by anyone who is moral is considered really good and holy and religious in Islam. For example, most religions would say that moral systems say murder is bad. Well, it's good in Islam. Dying is bad, but it's good in Islam. Stealing is bad, but it's good in Islam. The slave trade is bad, but it's good in Islam. That pedophilia is bad, but it's good in Islam. That rape is bad, but it's okay in Islam. So since bad is good in Islam, the word al-haram that speaks of that which is forbidden and bad became, well, the name for the first mosque. It's haram. It's just how screwed up this Quran and religion actually is. So they're acknowledging that the first mosque was pagan, that it was founded by the very people that the Muslims just killed, and that it was named forbidden, harmful. And then they're saying, but even though the 100% of the Islamic hadith, which is 100% of what's known about the history of this rock pile, say that the Quraysh were in fact the custodians of the rock pile, Allah say no, they weren't the custodians of the rock pile. So either the basis of it is a lie or Allah's a liar. Or I guess they could both be liars, right?
Perversion.
But there isn't any other option. Yes, the hostess has an option.
Isn't this the definition of perversion?
It is haram.
Perversion.
Yes.
Yes.
So there you go. Now we move on to the next statement, which is Quran 8:35. Their salat, oh boy, obligatory prostration prayer at the house was nothing but whistling and clapping. I mean, this is so stupid. Allah is easily the dumbest wannabe God in the history of wannabe gods. And for Muslims to believe him, they have to be equally stupid. And we're talking about a rock here. So you got to be dumb as a stone. Their salat, their prayer, their prostration prayer. Well, then who invented the prostration prayer that is now synonymous with Islam? It is the ultimate expression of Islam is this salat prostration prayer, bowing towards the house. And now Allah just admitted that they were doing it long before Muhammad and Islam was created. I'm trying to get the picture here that Islam is nothing but regurgitated paganism, that Muhammad stole the religion, just as he stole the property of his own family at Badr, he stole his religion. Islam is stolen goods. And the house, which is the Kaaba, was an invention of the very people they just abducted, mutilated, and killed. All part of religions that preceded Islam, simply incorporated into Islam. That's kind of norm for religion. Look at Christianity. Trinity is Babylonian, Easter is Babylonian, Christmas is Babylonian. The dying and resurrecting God is Babylonian. So it's the same sort of thing. The Lord comes from the Babylonian religion as well. So anyway, their plot was their salat, their prostration prayer, which they invented, not the Muslims, was nothing but whistling and clapping. Oh, the Islamic version is so much better because they recite this rote confession saying that we're stupid enough to believe the idiot that claims that he authored the mess that is the Quran, the worst book ever written, one that stole the religion. So therefore, because their prostration wasn't performed the way that Allah wants it performed, by the way, newsflash, guess what? The Quran never once, ever explains how to perform that prostration prayer. Never once, not even a hint of it. So if this one is wrong and the new Islamic version is correct, when they're both the same, why didn't the Quran, if it's supposed to be the book that tells you as a Muslim how to live your life, why doesn't it explain the prostration prayer? It doesn't. Even what's called the first surah, which never came from Muhammad, wasn't even invented anywhere close to Muhammad's time, that is contains the religious vomit that they recite while performing now this prostration prayer, didn't exist at the time. Wasn't part of the Quran recitals. But there is absolutely no explanation as to how to perform this correctly, since those who were invented the prostration prayer and were performing it at the Kaaba were doing it so badly that Allah says you need to taste the punishment because you used to disbelieve. How could they be disbelievers if they invented the Kaaba, they built the Kaaba, they worshipped at the Kaaba, they did the prostration prayer, they invented the Hajj, they were the first to do circumambulation. How could they be disbelievers? And why would anyone believe a God who is so sadistic? He would say, taste the punishment. And imagine a God so horrific that the tasting of punishment is because you didn't believe him when he gave you nothing to believe in. There isn't a prophecy in the Quran, not one, which is how Yahowah proves his existence and his authorship and inspiration of his Torah and prophets. Not one. There's not a miracle presented in the Quran. Not one. There's no new insight presented in the Quran. There is no accurate history presented in the Quran. So without accurate history and tons of inaccurate history, without any scientific revelation and tons of inaccurate scientific revelations, without a single prophecy that came true as predicted and many that failed to materialize, without a single new contribution to morality in the Quran, without any even new material in the Quran, how is one supposed to believe Allah, especially when Allah is this grotesquely immoral and dishonest? He stole his religion. And yet, because you are rational and informed and you don't believe him, different view on these kinds of things. Yahowah's approach is that you can choose to know him or not. You can choose to engage in a relationship with him or not. You can choose to share what you know about him or to lie about him. Yeah, we have free will. Not in Islam. There is no free will. Yahowah's view is you have total free will. You can choose to do any of these things. And so long as you are not deliberately deceiving others about him such that you are creating massive havoc, so long as you are not abusing his people, then you live your life, and at the end of your life, there is no reward or punishment. Your soul simply dissipates into nothingness. Yeah, gave you life. You chose not to use it effectively in terms of coming to know him. You get to make every choice in your life, and at the end of your life, if you haven't come to form a relationship with him, come to know him, your life just simply ends. There is no punishment. There is no reward. That's moral. In this case, Allah is saying just the opposite. If you choose not to believe him, he's going to punish you forever. And when you enjoy it, he wants you to taste it. The only people that receive a punishment from Yahowah are those who have gone out of their way to deliberately mislead about him, knowingly draw people away from him in a manner that causes his people to be abused, which is what any loving father would do on behalf of his children. Very different here. And the approach that Allah takes is the reason that there are so many agnostics relative to and atheists relative to the Christian New Testament. The Christian New Testament essentially says you either capitulate to the wannabe myth known as Jesus Christ, or you will roast forever in hell. And any moral person knows that a being who would say, capitulate to me or I will torture you forever, is sadistic and cannot be God and isn't worth knowing. And so they don't buy into Christianity. Fortunately, God is not that way. God very clearly says there are three destinations for human souls, and overwhelming preponderance of people receive no reward and no punishment. At the end of their lives, it's simply the end of their lives. Their souls dissipate into nothingness. But in Islam, it's far worse. You don't capitulate to him, Allah. You don't go off and die killing for Allah. You don't surrender everything to Allah and become his slave, or he will torture you forever. Now, what you don't hear are agnostics saying, I'm not a Muslim because, well, that proposition is hideous. And yet a much milder proposition in Christianity is rejected by thoughtful people, where it's far worse in Islam, and you hear no rejection of it. Matter of fact, the most recent Pew study showed that something actually changed radically here in the last 10 years relative to Islam. I think it's a direct result of having leftists, progressives, socialists partner with Islam. Most people don't know that Islam is entirely fascist in its behavior, and progressives are entirely socialist in their views. And most people think that socialism and fascism are opposites, when in fact they are exactly the same thing, just with different terminology. And because academia has controlled by leftists, and since the Progressive Islamic Alliance is now the greatest threat to life and liberty on the planet, what has happened is that Islam is being presented as something that is desirable as opposed to something that is deceitful and deadly by progressives. And they're marching in the streets and on college campuses trying to advance this both apartheid and genocide of Islam. And so it's becoming chic to wear the kippah of the fake Palestinians and to rally in support of Islamic terrorist groups and to call for the destruction of Israel and the demonization of Jews on behalf of Muslims. And when things become chic among people who lost the ability to think, then you will find libertarians all over the world saying, I identify now as a Muslim. I'm a Muslim. We're all Muslims. And so we're actually seeing that there's a very significant conversion rate now into Islam by choice in America and in the West, Europe in particular, because of this hypocritical and totally irrational alliance between progressives and Muslims. So it is something that is important. My producer wants me to say that we should make this shorter because we're having audio and video issues on this particular program. So at this point, what I'm going to do is say we have shared two citations from the Quran, 834 and 835. And in these two citations, we have ample evidence to recognize that Allah is a fraud, that the Quran is filled with disingenuous and dishonest citations that are specifically designed to demonize the victims of Islamic savagery while sanctifying thievery and murder and the slave trade. So with that said, we will end this program at this point, and we will begin anew shortly. Thank you for listening.